The year was 2011. The Arab Spring blossomed, a season of hope. But in Syria, it curdled into a bitter winter. A peaceful uprising against Bashar al-Assad's regime was met with brutal force. Cities crumbled under the weight of tanks and artillery. A humanitarian catastrophe unfolded. Millions were displaced. Millions more were trapped in a living hell. The world watched in horror. The cries for help were met with inaction. The conflict escalated. Rebel groups fractured, some turning to radical ideologies. The vacuum was filled by those with their own agendas. Regional powers saw an opportunity to assert themselves. Global powers saw a chessboard on which to play. Syria was no longer just a country in turmoil. It had become the epicenter of a new kind of conflict. The Syrian people became pawns in a larger game, their suffering, a footnote in the calculations of power. The conflict dragged on. Years bled into a decade. The world grew accustomed to the images of devastation. The world, it seemed, had moved on. But in Syria, the inferno raged on. Turkey under Recep Tayyip Erdogan watched with growing unease. The chaos on its southern border posed a direct threat. Refugees flooded in, straining resources and social cohesion, but it was the specter of Kurdish autonomy that truly alarmed Ankara. The Kurds, a stateless people with a long history of oppression, saw an opportunity in the chaos. They carved out their own enclaves in northern Syria, alarming Turkey, which saw them as a terrorist threat. Erdogan, a master of realpolitik, made his move. In 2016, Turkish forces launched Operation Euphrates Shield, a military incursion into northern Syria. The operation had two objectives. First, to crush the burgeoning Kurdish autonomy. Second, to establish a buffer zone within Syria, a bulwark against further instability. The move was a gamble, a high-stakes play that brought Turkey into direct confrontation with other players on the Syrian chessboard. It strained relations with the United States, a longtime ally that supported the Kurdish forces in their fight against ISIS. It also brought Turkey closer to Russia, another major player in the Syrian theater. The Sultan's gambit was a calculated risk. It was a move designed to secure Turkey's interests in a region spiraling into chaos, but it also had the potential to backfire, to further inflame the conflict and drag Turkey deeper into the Syrian quagmire. The United States, once the world's policeman, found itself entangled in yet another foreign conflict. Its involvement in Syria was hesitant at first, a reluctance born out of the fatigue of two long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the rise of ISIS, a barbaric terrorist organization that seized vast swaths of territory in Syria and Iraq, forced its hand. The US launched airstrikes against ISIS targets. It armed and trained local forces, primarily Kurdish militias, to combat the jihadist group on the ground. But its involvement was always characterized by a degree of ambiguity. Its objectives were never fully clear. Was it there to defeat ISIS, to topple Assad, or to counter Iranian influence? The lack of a coherent strategy, the shifting alliances, and the reluctance to commit ground troops all contributed to a sense of drift. The US found itself caught between competing interests and allies. Its support for the Kurds angered Turkey, a NATO ally. Its attempts to engage with Russia, another major player in Syria, were met with suspicion and distrust. The eagle's shadow loomed large over Syria, but it was a shadow cast by a superpower unsure of its role in a world that no longer played by its rules. The Cold War era saw the world divided into two major camps, each vying for global influence. As direct conflict was too risky, proxy wars became the method of choice. Nations were drawn into conflicts not of their making, becoming battlegrounds for superpower rivalries. From Korea to Vietnam, and from the Middle East to Africa, the echoes of these proxy wars still resonate today. It was a time when local conflicts had global implications, and the stakes were incredibly high. As tensions escalated, the world watched with bated breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. For 13 days in October 1962, the possibility of annihilation loomed large. Diplomacy and sheer luck played crucial roles in averting disaster. This period underscored the terrifying potential for a single misstep to lead to catastrophic consequences. The crisis was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of peace during the Cold War. The Cold War may have ended, but its legacy endures. The world remains a complex and often dangerous place. the geopolitical landscape is shaped by the remnants of past conflicts and the emergence of new challenges. As we navigate this intricate web of alliances and rivalries, the lessons of the Cold War remind us of the importance of diplomacy, dialogue, and the pursuit of peace. In a world on edge, these principles are more vital than ever.